Hey, church family and friends, it's great to be able to connect with you right here on Facebook and on YouTube as we continue studying the Word of God together. Today, we move forward in our study through the book of Isaiah, so let's go ahead and dig right into today's thought. We're looking today at Isaiah chapter 8 and verses 5 through 8, where the Word of God says this: "The Lord spake also unto me again, saying, For as much as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloh, that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory. And he shall come up over all his channels, and go over all his banks, and he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel." In our last thought, we found that God told Isaiah to take a great roll. He was told to write on it the word Maher Shalal Hashbaz in such a way that it could be clearly seen and easily understood. And then he was to put it in a prominent place where it could be seen and be read by all. We say that the sign was an important message to the nation of Israel, but it was also an invitation to the Assyrians to come and to claim the riches and the spoils of both Damascus and Samaria. Now, to King Ahaz, at least initially, that message was both an encouraging and an exciting one. I mean, after all, isn't that exactly what King Ahaz wanted? I remind you, instead of trusting God to take care of his present circumstances, we found that King Ahaz sent messengers with silver and gold from the house of the Lord and out of the treasures of the king's house to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, asking for his help in fighting the king of Syria and the king of Israel. That is exactly what we find is going to happen. The Assyrians are going to come and they are going to solve King Ahaz's problems. So to King Ahaz, it appears that he was getting everything that he wanted. What he quickly found out was that it didn't turn out exactly the way that he thought that it would. Trusting our flesh never does. King Ahaz chose to put his trust in his flesh, and it was a decision that turned out to be costly, consuming, and controlling. We understand that the decisions that we make today, they take root, and then they produce the fruit that we will have to deal with tomorrow. Simply put, it is never a good idea to put our confidence in our flesh. That's really what we find taking place here in our passage. Let's consider a few things together. Notice, first of all, that the flesh is deceptive. Look at what verse number 6 says. "For as much as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloh that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son." Now, I need to point out here that there's a wide range of ideas when it comes to who the phrase "this people" is referring to. In all likelihood, the phrase is referring to the people of the northern kingdom of Israel. And I say that for a couple reasons. Number one, if you'll remember back in chapter 7, the prophecy was that the northern kingdom's conspiracy against the southern kingdom with the king of Syria would not come to pass. And the event mentioned here in chapter 8 is the fulfillment of that promise. Secondly, here in verse number 6, this people had refused the waters of Shiloh. Now, Shiloh was a stream and a pool of water that was located on the southeast side of the ancient city of Jerusalem and was symbolic of the presence and of the provisions of God among his people. But the northern kingdom of Israel had refused the city of Jerusalem, and they had refused all that the city of Jerusalem stood for, all that it represented. They had chosen to openly embrace the practice of idolatry. Thirdly, here in verse 6, we find that the people were trusting in Rezin and in the son of Remaliah. Now, these were the kings of Syria and of the northern kingdom of Israel. And King Ahaz hadn't chosen to join with or trust in either of them. He had chosen to place his trust in the king of Assyria. Now, all that being said, where does the deception come in? Well, notice that this people rejoiced in Rezin and in Remaliah's son. Now, why did they place their faith, or why did they rejoice in these kings? Well, because they seemed to have a strategy. They seemed to have strength, and they seemed to have a solid chance at victory. But the reality is that the flesh is never enough. It always falls short. It always misdirects, and it always fails. That's why Proverbs 3:5 tells us to trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. Notice, secondly, the flesh is destructive. Verse 7. Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory, and he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. Now, the army of Assyria here is compared to a strong, mighty, rushing river. But the reality is that these mighty waters, they have a habit of overflowing their banks, causing great significant damage and leaving a noticeable and lasting path of destruction. That is exactly what would happen to the northern kingdom. Their strategy, it didn't work. Their strength, nope, wasn't enough. And their solid chance quickly turned into a colossal and catastrophic failure. Everything that we try to use as a substitute for God, we will find that it eventually takes from us everything that it initially promised and provided. Thirdly, the flesh is demanding. Look in verse number 8. And he shall pass through Judah, he shall overflow and go over, and he shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings, and shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. But what we find here is that the riches of Damascus and the spoils of Samaria, that wasn't enough for the king of Assyria and for the Assyrians. And the scriptures bears that out. Once the Assyrians claimed Damascus and Samaria, they began to squeeze out of the southern kingdom everything that they possibly could. You see, when we give the flesh time, we actually give it control. We understand that the flesh ultimately wants control, and it will do so if it is given the opportunity. It will exploit us for all that we're worth until we have nothing left to give, and then it will leave us for dead. That's what James 1:14 and 15 is talking about when it says, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. What I'm trying to say is this. As we go through life, there are going to be many opportunities, many obstacles, much opposition, many surprises, and yes, many setbacks. But the key to our victory and the key to our defeat is not found in what does or in what does not come into our lives. It's found in who we choose to trust when they do. Can I say this? Be careful who you choose to refuse and who you choose to rejoice in, because the result really is the difference between your reward and your ruin. Friend, let me say thank you for joining with me today. Let me encourage you to hit the share button. I would greatly appreciate that. And then make plans to join us next time as we continue our study through Isaiah. But until next time, good day and God bless.